drones to do good, and we don't want to upset the development of that path by just a few people who aren't following the rules and understanding what they need to do. So we've got to get that balance right.
Tim, thank you. Tim Boyle, GM of Air Traffic Services at Airways. Just coming back down to earth before we go, the Otago Daily Times reports that cell phone use in cars is causing more crashes in the south. The number of crashes in the south so far this year involving drivers distracted by their cell phones has already reached the same level as the total recorded last year. People are calling star 555 far more to report cell phone users, but as we heard last week, an answer to a quick question, that doesn't guarantee the driver will be chased.
Jim, I came driving in here today, this afternoon, a guy in a Q7 behind me was on his cell phone for ages.
Just talking or texting?
Holding his phone to his ear. I mean, he's in a brand new Q7. Surely he's got...
Yeah.
Worse is when you're texting or Spotifying or whatever. Yeah, like when people are like looking down at the screen. And I've been guilty of that as well. It's very frightening.
You just can't.
That is actually a quick way to kill yourself and other people, isn't it? Texting. There's no one who can text and drive properly.
No.
Well,
they think they can.
Luckily, they think they can, yeah.
No, you just can't do it.
The British have got some great ads about the dangers of texting. I think this is one of them.
A 2-second glance doubles the risk of crashing. So what are you really missing?
So people, the ad is people in terrible road safety situations because they couldn't wait to know what restaurant they had been booked into that night.
Yeah. It's amazing because it just even if you can stay on the road straight, it really lessens your ability to slow down for people who run onto the road or, a car that stops suddenly in front of you. And I'm a real hypocrite here because I would use my phone a lot in the car. And every time we talk about this or someone brings it up, I always think I'm going to change my behaviour, and I don't.
Talking or texting, though?
For me, it's more Spotify and navigation, like always fiddling around with maps on where I'm going and stuff like that. Because, it's quite fiddly.
That takes your concentration.
You're zooming in on your map and you're zooming out on your map and stuff like that, or changing song. Yeah, it's a real problem.
Yeah, but you're talking more about general distraction, aren't you, rather than Facebook posting and...
Oh, I'm not Facebook posting. I'm not a psychopath. No. I wouldn't even do that. Even if I wasn't driving, I wouldn't do that. But I get... what shakes me up is when I see a police car, because I immediately just throw my phone wherever it can go to get it, because I'm so afraid the police are going to notice, as if they're worried about that, really. They've got bigger concerns, probably. But
would we profit by going after texting? I mean, we're currently going after smoking in cars with children. Would a campaign where you actually emphasise texting, because people aren't going to give up talking on phones in all probability, are they?
No.
So would a campaign whereby you actually emphasise that texting is next level and to be avoided, would that work?
Yeah, I think so. I think we need to really scare people like we scare people with drunk driving and stuff like that.
I think so too. I do.
I need to be scared.
You need to be scared, Guy. I'm going to scare you next time.
Just before we go, we talk about bad driving a lot and whether concentrating on speeding helps keep the road toll down. 2 people have sent in this suggestion. Where there are 2 lanes, make one lane 80 k's an hour and the other 100 k's an hour, and make people keep left and less overtaking. Do you think that would work? Different speed limits for different lanes?
I thought that was generally the unwritten rule, is that if you're on the closest to the barrier lane, you're going a little bit faster. She agrees.
Yeah.
Jim's looking at us horrified.
But not officially.
Yeah, not officially.
Guy, thank you. Good luck with your last show. Guy Williams has been on.
Thank you so much for having me. I love it.
Julia Hartley-Moore, always a pleasure to see you.
Thank you, and I love it.
We are back tomorrow, and we'd love to see you then.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint, I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's programme, the government's announced a Royal Commission of Inquiry into the abuse of children will extend beyond state care to faith-based organisations, but it will stop short of sports and other cultural groups. It'll focus on abuse between 1950 and 1999, but could stretch beyond those dates. The Minister for Children says they need to draw the line somewhere, but is the scope too narrow? We talked to a lawyer specialising in abuse cases. And how to make our skies safer after another drone scare this time shuts down Wellington Airport. Should Pride, the parade that celebrates diversity, ban uniformed police officers from marching? And as bushfires sweep through California, we talk to a stuntman taking a real-life risk.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Paul Brennan. The government's inquiry into the abuse of children in state care has been expanded to include religious institutions. The Royal Commission will begin hearing evidence from January next year. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says her preference was to keep the scope narrow and focused on abuse that occurred within state care. But the strength of submissions calling for religious organisations to be included were too strong to ignore. The Catholic and Anglican churches have welcomed the decision, saying they will work towards healing. The inquiry has a budget of almost $79 million over 4 years, which includes more than $15 million to help participants by providing counselling and related support. The final report will be submitted to the Governor-General in January 2023. Atu i te whare pāremata, ko Chris Bramwell ahau.
The Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, is urging the Educational Institute to calm tensions around the primary teachers' pay talks. The union today began a week of one-day rolling strikes in primary and intermediate schools, despite being told by the Employment Relations Authority last week that its demands are unrealistic. Chris Hipkins says the government tried to avoid the strikes and it wants to continue negotiation.
The NZEI should be considering very carefully where they go from here. I think that they need to work with their members to de-escalate the situation. We have been working as hard as we can over the last few weeks and months to de-escalate the situation, to give teachers the reassurance that we are absolutely committed to addressing the issues that they have been raising.
Chris Hipkins says the government will not add more money to the offer, which is worth nearly $700 million over 4 years. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says a report into the appointment of the Deputy Police Commissioner proves the government can have confidence in the process that was followed. The inquiry carried out by Mary Schultens QC concludes the process to appoint Wally Haumaha was adequate and fit for purpose. The review was sparked after it emerged Mr Haumaha made comments in 2004 defending police officers accused of raping a woman, Louise Nicholas. Ms Ardern is still refusing to say whether she has confidence in Mr Haumaha, while police investigations continue into alleged bullying against him.
Obviously there's another key report still underway, but what we can say is that the process that was applied, we can have confidence in that.
Jacinda Ardern says a report from the Independent Police Conduct Authority on the bullying allegations is expected by the end of the year. Government-backed endorsements that made unsubstantiated fire safety claims about high-rise building cladding have been dumped. The 6 code mark certificates for aluminium composite panels were suspended in July. Now the Ministry for Business, Innovation and Employment has revoked 4 of them and the manufacturer has withdrawn the other 2. This follows an audit prompted by the Grenfell Tower fire in London last year. 2 types of panels still carry code mark certificates, but these no longer make any fire safety claims. The ministry says there's no evidence the panels are dangerous, but councils can no longer rely on code mark to approve their use. The Governor of California, Jerry Brown, is urging Donald Trump to declare a major disaster in response to huge wildfires in the state. The appeal comes a day after Mr Trump threatened to cut funding to California, blaming the fires on poor forest management. At least 31 people have died in the fires, most of them in the town of Paradise, north of San Francisco. The BBC's James Cook reports.
In the ruins of Paradise, teams are sifting through the ashes, trying to find and identify human remains. The town is no more, with 6,000 homes obliterated in the most destructive wildfire in California's history and one of the deadliest. Forecasters say dangerous winds will fuel blazes in the north and south of the state for at least the next 2 days.
James Cook reporting there. The Horowhenua District Council has been censured for blacklisting some people and organisations and blocking their emails. The Ombudsman has found this was flawed and wrong. Between 2011 and 2017, the Council's Chief Executive, David Clapperton, arranged for the IT team to forward the blocked emails to him, and he then decided whether to send them on. The Ombudsman, Peter Boscher, investigated after 5 people on the blacklist complained. He says the practice was contrary to transparency, accountability and fairness. A farm worker accused of sparking the strawberry needle saga will remain in custody after appearing in a Brisbane court today. Mai Ut Trina was arrested in Brisbane yesterday, 2 months after Queensland police warned about punnets being contaminated with needles. The 50-year-old has been charged with 7 counts of contaminating goods with intent to cause economic loss and faces up to 10 years jail if convicted. The court was told that the woman's DNA was found in a punnet of strawberries in Victoria. It's 4.5 minutes past 5. To sport, the All Blacks coach Steve Hansen is willing to have a chat to the Ireland coach Joe Schmidt about the pressures of the All Blacks job if he's serious about applying for it. Both coaches' contracts expire after next year's Rugby World Cup. And the 53-year-old Smid, who is a New Zealander, has been touted as a successor to Hansen, who's been with the team since 2004. The former All Blacks captain Richie McCaw gave Smid a ringing endorsement over the weekend, but Hansen has been reticent to share his thoughts following the team's arrival in Dublin.
If I did have some advice for him, I wouldn't be telling him through the media. So if he needs my advice on that, he'll ask me, and over a cold beer or a cup of coffee or something, we'll talk about it. But he's a smart man, Joe, and he'll do what's right for his family, I'm sure, and make a decision based around those things, the same as all of us will.
Meanwhile, Fiji will again host a Super Rugby with the Chiefs and Crusaders to again square off in Suva in June next year. The New Zealand golfer Danny Lee is $1 million richer after finishing second in the latest PGA tournament in Mexico. Lee fired a final round 6 under par 65 to close to within one of American Matt Kuchar at the Mayakoba Classic. English Premier League football champions Manchester City remain 2 points clear at the top of the competition following a 3-1 win in the derby against Manchester United. Liverpool remains second after a 2-0 win over Fulham, with neighbours Everton holding Chelsea to a goalless draw. Arsenal drew 1-1 with Wolverhampton Wanderers, and that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Justin Gregory and Zoe George launch Not Your Average Cricket Show. Following the fortunes of the national women's team at the World 2020 Cup, Peter Lamp offers his assessment of the All Blacks England test. The BBC begins a series celebrating scientific mistakes. Part 1, Viagra, was meant to fix your heart, not your libido. And Nick Holm on organising a feral conference online. It's a climate neutral thing. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast for the country from Med Service, taking us to midnight tomorrow Tuesday. Northland and Auckland, fine and cloudy periods. Waikato to Whanganui, including Coromandel Bay of Plenty. The central high country, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, a few showers, especially about the ranges. Some heavy with isolated thunderstorms and hail during the afternoons and evenings. Manawatu to Wellington and Wairarapa. Also Nelson and Buller, mainly fine, but isolated afternoon and evening showers about the ranges. Westland and Fiordland, showers in Fiordland, easing and spreading north this afternoon, becoming mostly fine tomorrow. Marlborough and Canterbury, mainly fine, but scattered afternoon and evening showers inland today. Some heavy with possible thunderstorms and hail near the ranges. Coastal low cloud tomorrow. Otago and Southland, scattered showers for the rest of today. Some heavy with isolated thunderstorms and hail in the east, and mainly fine tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, mainly fine. It is nearly 8 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Paul. The government has caved into public pressure, expanding the Royal Commission beyond just the abuse of children in state care. It'll be the largest Royal Commission ever undertaken in New Zealand. It will cost almost $79 million over 4 years, including more than $15 million for counselling and related support for participants. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern made the announcement this afternoon, saying the scope of the inquiry has been broadened to include abuse of children in religious institutions.
Extending the scope so the inquiry includes faith-based institutions was one of the most strongly argued issues in the consultation process, and it is important to this government that we listen to the voices of those victims. The inquiry will be now called the Royal Commission into Historical Abuse in State Care and in the Care of Faith-based Institutions, to reflect its extended scope. Its terms of reference will be released this afternoon. I also want to be clear, though, that in broadening the scope, we remain committed to fulfilling the expectations of those who sought the inquiry into state care. That's why we have asked that the first interim report of the inquiry is focused on state care. That will be reported by the end of 2020. A separate report will then focus on the care of children in faith-based institutions.
The Royal Commission's final report will be submitted to the Governor-General in January 2023. While the scope of the Royal Commission has been broadened, it will not include organisations such as sporting bodies, youth clubs or community groups such as Scouts. The final terms of reference haven't been made public yet, but in today's announcement, the government made clear the scope of the Royal Commission would focus on cases between 1950 and 1999, but Commission members will have some discretion to look outside outside of that time period. Sonia Cooper is a Wellington-based human rights lawyer who specialises in abuse cases and joins me now. Sonia, what do you feel about the time frame, 1950 to 1999, but with some discretion to look beyond those years? Is that good enough?
No, and I'm going to be really blunt about that. I know that we were part of a very strong advocacy group pushing for the time frame to come as far forward as possible into the current time, and that's really because for this Royal Commission to actually do a meaningful job, it needs to actually understand what's happening to children in care right now so that it can make recommendations about practice that will affect the children who are coming into care now and in the future. I think the problem with stopping it at the end of 1999, although with that discretion, is that we won't have those very current stories, and that will, I think, impede the veracity and in fact the integrity of the Royal Commission to actually be able to carry out a fundamental task, and that is that survivors were asking all the way through that what they wanted was to make sure that no other child going into care is abused. I think without credible data about what's happening to children in care, at least up until very recently, the Royal Commission's just simply not going to be able to undertake that task.
But Sonia, they are leaving the door open here, so they potentially could include cases outside of that and give themselves some current data.
I think we haven't seen the actual detail yet, and I, like you, no doubt, I've been watching out for the terms of reference to be released. I suspect that what happens is if you've got a foot in the door, so if, for example, you were in care between, say, 1945 and 1952, you'll be able to speak with the Royal Commission because you were in care after 1950. Similarly, I suspect that if you were in care in the 1990s and then you are still in care in the 2000s, you'll be able to present to the Royal Commission. But I suspect if you're clearly outside of that, you know, like your care finishes in 1949, for example, or your care only starts in 2000, that you may not be able to have a voice with the Royal Commission, and that's the concern. And I guess that's going to be in the detail. We haven't seen that yet.
Do you think it should be right up to current day, right up to children who are in care now?
I think we certainly advocated that it should be at the very latest through to the creation of Oranga Tamariki, which was last year. And, you know, we were happy to have, you know, kind of, I suppose, a line in the sand there, because at the end of the day, the government said, well, Oranga Tamariki is a new organisation, it's new legislation, we should, you know, let it get on with its work. So we were okay about it being to that point, which at least takes us right through to 2017. And that's a kind of a logical cut-off point, I think, as well.
So as it stands, sorry Sonia, but as it stands, how many of your clients would be excluded from this inquiry right now with the dates that have been presented?
Well, I had a look at that. So we've got 240 clients who were born after 1984. So some of them, I think, potentially will be excluded, but it's more the clients who were born after 1990, pretty much all of whom I think will be excluded. And we've got over 100 clients who were born after 1990. I mean, our youngest client was born in 2000.
So what does that mean? Their voices just simply will not be heard?
Well, I imagine that that's the case. As I say, there may be some, if some of those clients, I imagine, were in care in the 1990s, they might be able to get in. And as I say, that depends very much on what the detail says. And it may be too. I don't know. Again, if they're part of a whānau where, you know, their siblings were in care, they might get a voice, a backhand voice that way. But I think our concern is going to be that group, and that group is growing, I note, will have no voice. And really the only option that leaves for that group is litigation.
And what do they feel about that, to be left out?
Well, I know it's been a concern, and I mean, as of yet, they're just going to be hearing this news as you know, as they listen to various media organisations. We're going to have to think about how we actually send that information out to our clients. But we know from the multiple phone calls and letters that we've had from clients is for the younger clients, they are going to be concerned and some quite devastated by that. And again, you know, their interest is too, they've had their abusive experiences. They're actually still suffering deeply from the damage caused by that. And a lot of them are in prison now. You know, a lot of them are doing really poorly because of, you know, that's that's the way that abuse affects people. It's just, you know, devastating. And so I think to have, not have this forum is a way that can actually look at their concerns and actually impact, as I say, hopefully in a positive way on the way in which children now in care and in the future in New Zealand are looked after. I think they'll find that really hard to handle.
So their only option, as far as you can see it, is to take it to court, which is obviously long and arduous. But the government, and this is what was said at the press conference today, is they need to put a full stop somewhere, is their point. You know, the inquiry will last 4 years as it is. The final report is off in 2023 and it's costing almost $80 million. There needs to be a line in the sand. Do you accept that?
Oh, look, I accept there needs to be a line in the sand, but at the end of the day, if we're doing a royal commission, it should be done once and it should be done right. And I think, you know, we've got what, 6,300 children currently in care in New Zealand. Huge numbers of care in New Zealand. And we know from all the reports that have been issued even in recent years that, you know, abuse is it's not a phenomenon that belongs to the past. It is still very much in New Zealand's present history. And what, are we going to have another Royal Commission in another 20 years to deal with the abuse that the children now in care and our client group who haven't been heard? Are we going to hear from them in 20 years' time?
Or, Sonia, is it that they don't want to hear from them, that they don't want to know what is going on now? Do you suspect that might be the case?
Oh, I think that's absolutely the case. I think there is a degree to which this is about, you know, let's pretend that everything is actually all right in New Zealand. Let's pretend that Oranga Tamariki has fixed everything up. And I think that's actually been a part of New Zealand history in terms of dealing with these claims generally. Claims generally is to pretend that it's all been all right, it hasn't been us, no, it wasn't us. Or that it's something of the past instead of confronting that it's actually something that is our present
All right.
and will be our future.
Good to talk to you. That is Sonia Cooper, who's a Wellington-based human rights lawyer, and she specialises in abuse cases. Poor pay, ballooning class sizes and increasingly challenging working conditions have pushed primary school teachers to breaking point. Hundreds of Auckland teachers walked off the job today, the first of a series of rolling strikes taking place across the country this week. The strikes come after teachers rejected a new $700 million pay deal. On Friday, our reporter Nita Blake-Person and cameraman Nick Monroe visited a school on Auckland's North Shore to hear from teachers and students about the pressures they're under.
Target Road School is bursting with kids. It's set up for 340 students, but there are 422 here. Once a week they all cram into the school hall for assembly, so teachers can have 1 hour of precious non-contact time. As the population of Glenfield skyrockets with new subdivisions and townhouses popping up, more students are pouring into classrooms every week.
Our class is a new entrant New 1 class. We have got 22 children currently, with the possibility of having more. At one stage of the year we had 24 kids, which when the government caps, their advice is to cap new entrant classes at 18, is unrealistic at this time when we can't get teachers in to fill the positions, especially for new entrant New 1. I'm just going to shut that.
We can pause if you want to.
Joyce, do you want to come and stir it while I pop it in?
Rebecca Osborne is one of several teachers here who are part-time. She shares her class with another teacher because the demands of working full-time are too much with her young family.
Well, I do my my school hours, and then after hours it's most evenings, a couple of hours most evenings, and some parts of the weekend. It is a really difficult job to balance when you have a family. And I was always told when I was studying and first started teaching, it was a great job to fit around your family, but I don't find it great to fit around my family.
Today she's used her own money to buy groceries to make a meal with her students. Spending time with kids is the part of the job she loves, but things have changed in recent years.
I first went on maternity leave in 2011. I can remember being in the office with my principal. It wasn't at this school, it was my previous school. And there was a stack of CVs on her desk, almost to her head, a lot, over 100. And she said, oh, this is what I've got to do tonight. I've got to look through all these CVs and find someone, and I've only got 2 jobs, and I don't, then I've got to ring all those people and let them down. Then when I went on maternity leave in 2016, they actually couldn't find anyone to fill my position. This year we've had to do move-throughs in our classrooms because we can't find teachers to open new entrant rooms. We can't find relievers to be in our classes if we're sick. There's just no one.
Like many schools in Auckland, Target Road faces an uphill battle to fill its classrooms. Students are often taught by a changing cast of part-time, full-time and relief teachers. One class has had 5 different teachers this year.
Do you notice lots of teachers coming and going and relievers and change and things like that?
So many. I'd say we'd have at least 2 relievers per week. We have our main teacher for like 4 out of the 5 days, and we'd have a reliever for that whole day, or we'd have a teacher like for 3 days, and then 2 other days we'd have relievers. Like every single week this term we've had at least 1 reliever.
Sometimes it's Miss Daisy, sometimes it's Miss O.
I really just wish we had 1 teacher. It's kind of like sad when like your teacher's gone, because like then you don't get to spend more time with them, and if you're split class then you don't get to like really know like their personality and that.
Do we want you to have lots and lots of different teachers every year?
Target Road's principal Helen Varney says the cost of living is driving teachers out of Auckland, and schools are competing for the shrinking pool that remains.
In Term 3, there would not have been a single day go by when at least one of my classes was split because we couldn't get relievers.
Ms Varney, who's been teaching for nearly 40 years, says the government hasn't been doing enough to attract trainee teachers for years.
They cannot recruit enough people into our teachers' colleges. The classroom of the old days, when everybody knew each other in the street and everybody came from a very similar cultural background, and the majority of your children spoke English as their first language, are gone. The classroom now is it's a melting pot of richness, but it provides wonderful opportunities for people to learn about each other, but it also sets in place some difficulties around resourcing and teaching practices and teaching.
Helen Varney says poor pay is a big part of why teachers are leaving, especially when overseas schools are offering tax-free incentives along with living costs.
Now, if you were a qualified teacher here and you were then going on to earning only 60,000 or even 70 if you're at the top of the line, you still have to pay tax, you've still got to pay for housing, you've still got to pay for your children. Why wouldn't you go? So what we have to do is we've got to look at how we're going to keep them here. How are we going to keep our best quality teachers in the profession so our kids have the best quality education and future.
Pupils here might still be getting to grips with maths, but they reckon their teachers are worth more.
Teachers don't get good money, and I find that sad for the teachers, because some teachers like Mr. G are so nice, but they just have to leave because they can't deal with the money down over here because it's not enough. They have loads of kids, like 430 kids, and they have to teach them for 6 hours a day. So I think they should get a fair amount of pay.
They're fabulous. You learn so much in their class, and they're not only making you learn, they're making the learning fun.
Learning that might become more difficult in the future if Target Road and other schools like it can't attract more teachers. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Nita Blake Person, aho.
Two deadly wildfires fuelled by devil winds have torn through opposite ends of California, with residents urged to heed official evacuation orders and leave their homes. In Northern California, the Camp Fire is one of the deadliest and most destructive in the state's history, killing at least 23 since it broke out last Thursday and destroying most of the mountain town of Paradise. More than 100 people remain unaccounted for. CNN's Kim Hutchison reports.
The fire in Butte County right now, in this fire, the rate of spread is exponentially more than it used to be.
Powerful and dry winds rolling into the already charred hillsides of California, raising concerns for crews battling 3 raging wildfires. In the north, the Camp Fire has destroyed more than 6,000 structures, making it the most destructive fire and the 3rd deadliest in the state's history.
Our place is still standing, and they're still trying to hold the line there, so we're grateful for that.
The flames wiped out the town of Paradise, where most of the bodies were found, some burned beyond recognition. Crews are moving into the blackened ruins to assess the damage and search for more bodies. In Southern California, the Woolsey and Hill fires have burned more than 90,000 acres combined. Roughly 200,000 people have been evacuated. On Sunday, some evacuees were allowed to return to what's left of their homes.
It's just nothing describes what you see here.
While a new round of evacuations were ordered for people in multiple LA County neighborhoods.
We realize that some folks are still in that Topanga area, and we just want to make sure that they understand that this is the time to leave at this point.
CNN's Kim Hutchison reporting there. Amidst the chaos and destruction brought by the Woolsey fire, a tight-knit community of horse owners and breeders rallied over the weekend to save the area's animals. Earlier this afternoon, stuntman Ardashir Radpour told me he'd spent the past few days transporting horses to safety.
Most of them are, people they'll call you, or you'll know people, and they'll call you and they'll say, hey, I have a friend of mine who's stuck in so-and-so location. Can you guys go? I mean, 99% of the people that are out there helping out, they're not rescuers. Nobody is, hired to do this. It's just the horse community here immediately mobilizes when we see this. You don't even question it. It just becomes your sense of civic duty, to help save lives, whether it's people or their animals and so forth. So you just immediately kick in and you go do it. But every time we're doing it, we know what we're about to go into. Looks like a hell zone. There's fire, there's people panicking, there's horses and animals panicking, and heaven forbid any of us are stuck in that situation without the means. We would expect someone else to come and help us. The horse community is pretty tight, and we all know, wow, these people are stuck in these unfortunate circumstances. Next week it could be me, and they would come to our aid. So we just naturally mobilized as just a neighbor helping neighbor type of a situation.
How are the animals? Because I imagine, it's a pretty horrendous situation. As you said, the hills are ablaze with fire and they're in a helpless situation. How are the animals?
To be honest with you, some of them deal with it very calm and some of them really panic. And they're just like people. Like I've seen 60 horses being led out by, 10 people, calm, like almost in military order. And I've seen others hanging on to one horse for dear life because it could be the human or it could be the horse that's just freaking out, just losing it. And the situation also is it's a little bit heightened, not necessarily just because of the fire, but because you have all the fire trucks, you have all the law enforcement vehicles, all the emergency vehicles, forestry service, all those sirens and lights that go on. It really makes that situation even a little bit more of a hectic situation. So the horses, they can kind of panic, but I'll be honest with you, they hold it together way better than most of the time I think they will. Every once in a while you'll see one really lose it, and they can't catch them. And these fires aren't anywhere near done, and the winds have picked back up, so who knows which way they're going to head and what's going to happen. And by the way, as they're going into seeing these facilities, they're seeing a lot of facilities burn down. I've had 3 friends that lost everything. They got all their animals out. But who knows what's happened at some of these other facilities. We just don't know yet. None of that information has come out yet. So we're keeping our fingers crossed we haven't lost any horses, but don't know yet.
A cloud hanging over the Deputy Police Commissioner, Wally Homaha, is beginning to clear with an inquiry into his appointment, finding the process was sound. The government says it now has full confidence in the selection process. However, it won't go so far as to say that it has confidence in Mr Homaha himself just yet. The review was sparked after victims' rights advocate Louise Nicholas spoke up in June and raised concerns. Here's our political reporter Craig McCulloch.
Since late June, Wally Homaha has been a headache for the government. First questions about his appointment, then an inquiry beset with problems. Today, some clarity.
From a government perspective, we have full confidence in the process.
The State Services Minister, Chris Hipkins, has received a report looking into Mr Homaha's promotion. The government ordered the inquiry after Louise Nicholas, a victim advisor to the police, went public with her concerns. Witness statements from 2004 appear to show Mr Homaha defending police officers accused of raping Ms Nicholas. But the inquiry, led by Mary Sholtons QC, has found the selection process was sound.
There were no substantiated concerns, whether criminal, disciplinary, reputational or otherwise, that should be treated as relevant to the appointment.
The report says the appointment panel had all the information they needed to make a decision, that they carefully investigated rumours about Mr Homaha and his alleged comments, but found no evidence he'd done anything wrong.
An appointment process should not be impeded by, rumour and claims that can't be substantiated.
In a statement, Wally Homaha says he's very pleased by the report and is extremely grateful to all those who have supported him. He says he's gained personal insights during the inquiry. But the opposition still has a lot of questions. The National MP, Chris Bishop, says the report doesn't address the biggest one. Should Mr Homaha still be in the job?
The Prime Minister can hire Mr Homaha, the Prime Minister can fire Mr Homaha. The question really for her is whether or not she thinks she should do that.
Mr Homaha is still under a separate investigation by the Independent Police Conduct Authority over recently lodged bullying complaints. And while the government has confidence in the overall process, the Police Minister Stuart Nash won't yet express the same in Mr Homaha himself.
Until the IPCA report comes back, I don't want to be seen to be prejudicing that in any way, shape or form. You should probably ask the Commissioner of Police if he has confidence in his executive team.
Yes, I do have confidence in Wally Homaha.
The Police Commissioner, Mike Bush, is pleased with the findings. He spoke with Mr Homaha this afternoon about his next steps.
Of course, there is an IPCA inquiry underway, so we're going to wait until we see what that has to say. But of course, Wally still remains working with the New Zealand Police, working remotely, so that will continue.
That IPCA report is expected back before the end of the year. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
Coming up, how to keep our skies safer. A drone scare shuts down Wellington Airport. How could it have been much worse? The Pride Parade celebrates diversity, so should it ban uniformed police officers from marching in it? And we're on Mana Island, where a protected weevil is thriving, but at the peril of other rare native species. We would love your feedback. Don't forget you can text us on 2101 and you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us, Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. But here's Paul Brennan with the news.
Good afternoon. The Prime Minister says the inquiry into the abuse of children in state care has been expanded to include religious institutions because of pleas from victims and churches. Jacinda Ardern says her preference had been to keep the scope narrow and focused on abuse within state care, but the strength of the requests were too strong to ignore. The Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, is urging the Primary Teachers Union to calm tensions over their pay talks. A week of one-day rolling strikes in primary and intermediate schools is underway. Chris Hipkins says the government wants to continue negotiations, but there will be no more money added to the latest offer, which is worth nearly $700 million over 4 years. The Prime Minister says a report into the appointment of the Deputy Police Commissioner, Wally Homaha, proves the government can have confidence in the process that was followed. But Jacinda Ardern is still refusing to say whether she has confidence in Mr Homaha, while police investigations continue into allegations of bullying made against him. The National MP Chris Bishop says the silence speaks volumes. Government-backed endorsements that made unsubstantiated fire safety claims about high-rise building cladding have been dumped. This follows an audit prompted by the Grenfell Tower fire in London last year. 2 types of panels still carry code mark certificates, but these no longer make any fire safety claims. The ministry says there's no evidence the panels are dangerous, but councils can no longer rely on Codemark to approve their use. The death toll from the devastating California fires has risen to 31, most of them in the town of Paradise, north of San Francisco. The Horowhenua District Council has been censured for blacklisting some people and organisations and blocking their emails. The Ombudsman has found this was flawed and wrong, and a farm worker accused of sparking the strawberry needle saga will remain in custody after appearing in the Brisbane court today. 50-year-old Mai Ut Trina has been charged with 7 counts of contaminating goods with intent to cause economic loss and faces up to 10 years jail if convicted. And those are the news headlines.
Thanks, Paul. Turning to business now, Madison Reddy joins us in the studio. So a major update today, Madison, with CBL Insurance. What's the story?
It's in liquidation. So this came out of a High Court hearing at the Auckland High Court this morning. It began at around 10 a.m. and this afternoon it was decided that the interim liquidators from McGrath-Nicol would be appointed officially. So this evening they were briefing staff about what would happen. I tried to talk to them about half an hour ago, but instead they just sent a statement saying that policyholders should continue to notify CBLI of claims, CBL Insurance, not the corporation, which will be assessed and processed. However, claims cannot be paid at this time. So CBL Insurance is a huge backstory behind this one. The corporation is in voluntary administration, but it all started in actually February, so about 10 months ago now, when the Reserve Bank, the official bank, moved to liquidate it. It applied to liquidate it in the High Court because it realised that it had breached its solvency issues there, and that it couldn't actually afford to pay out large insurance claims. And we were actually pretty much expecting it to be liquidated today because there was notorious support to restructure it from the directors. They thought that they could revive the insurance subsidiary, restructure it, and keep it going. But they actually withdrew that opposition earlier this morning. So it was no surprise today that it was liquidated, given that there was no contest to do the opposite. We actually spoke to the managing director of CBL Corporation today, Peter Harris, who hasn't necessarily fronted up on this all that often. We asked him today what he would say to shareholders who have lost hundreds of millions of dollars from his company. Here's what he had to say.
I just, I'm very sad for a lot of people and our employees and that sort of thing. Our team has stayed together throughout this. We've got a lot of support around the world, and I sort of feel we've let them down a little bit. But we came very close. I think if we would have won in court, but however, we just need to make the best of this and now spend our time on productive things rather than just fighting in the courts.
That's Peter Harris, the Managing Director of CBL Insurance, which is now from today in liquidation. And also the Reserve Bank welcomed that liquidation move by the High Court today. And also just this afternoon, they announced in their statement welcoming this move that they've actually launched their own independent review into their own dealings with CBL Insurance. There's been some criticism that they shouldn't have even given CBL Insurance a licence to operate way back in 2013. So they've launched a review into that decision. And that's being led by a Queen's Counsel and another insurance guy called John Trowbridge.
So still more to come on that.
Definitely more to come.
Fonterra Management. Okay, so they've faced off with shareholders again today. What happened there?
So there's two parts of Fonterra on the NZX. There's the cooperative, which is obviously owned by farmer shareholders, which we hear from all the time. The other side of it is actually the Fonterra Shareholders Fund. Now that's like any NZX listed company that's just listed on the share market. So they had their annual meeting for that part of the company today. So the Fonterra management had to front up for the third time in person, not just to media and also farmers, but to these retail investors who typically look at their business decisions. A lot of the questions being thrown at them today.
Curly questions, were they?
Certainly curly, and certainly a frank mood in there as well. Most of the questions were around their business decisions around China, given that its investment in Being Mate turned out to be an absolute lemon. The chairman even today calling it its problem child, and also their China farms losing about 9 million last year as well. But looking forward, this is what the Fonterra management really wanted to focus on. They talked about their outlook and the future prospects for the company, which they are obviously all very positive about. The Chief Executive Miles Hurrell really focused on the future, and he said that they're making good progress on everything that they said they would do a couple of months ago, which is reducing their capital expenditure, so down from 861 million is what they spent last year. They're drawing a line in the sand this year to only spend $650 million. They also say that their plan to reduce debt by $800 million is on target.
Any more curly questions about his salary package?
There wasn't, and they have been very plumb about that one. They haven't actually given us a figure, but they've said last week it came out of the farmer shareholders meeting, that other side I mentioned, that is being paid substantially less, but that will be revealed in their financial year results next year.
And markets, what happened there?
The NZX Top 50 Index actually rose, up 0.3% tonight, so that's about 25 points to 8,957. The New Zealand dollar is buying at 67.4 US cents, still really strong there, 93.3 to the Australian and 52.2 British pence.
Fantastic, Madison. Thanks for that. The Auckland Pride Parade, which takes centre stage on Ponsonby Road, is one of the most visible celebrations of inclusiveness in the country. But that image is under threat after the Auckland Pride Board said it would ban police from wearing their uniforms at the parade. The decision is dividing the LGBTQI community. Some say the ban needs to be removed, while others say the police have a long way to go before they should join the parade. Te Manu Korahi reporter, John Boynton has more.
Thousands of people line up on Ponsonby Road for the annual Pride Festival each year. But next year, police and correction staff won't be able to attend wearing their uniforms. The Auckland Pride Board says it made the decision last week because the police do not meet the safety needs of rainbow communities. Sarah Peel's dad worked as a police officer for 40 years and is one of her most loyal supporters, walking by her side in previous Pride parades.
He has always supported gay rights, even before I was born and even before I was out. He was always a major ally to the LGBT community.
And she feels for those police officers who won't be able to express their identity and sexuality at the parade.
To tell them that their service isn't good enough, to be proud of that and their sexual orientation or their gender identity, it's taking away part of their identity.
Miss Peel plans to boycott the Pride event, but for Emily Rakete from People Against Prisons Aotearoa, the ban has been a long time coming.
It's a really positive step that the Pride Parade has acknowledged that New Zealand's police force has a lot of work to do before they should be celebrated in a parade of this kind.
Ms Rakete believes the Pride Festival shouldn't be about looking for favour from different organisations and businesses.
Pride, I think, should always be something which is confrontational, something that's funny, something that's exciting. And seeing it turned into a parade of ads for banks, businesses and the police force, to me, as a lesbian woman, is actually really insulting to the spirit of what Pride should be in the first place.
One Auckland Pride Board member, Maddie Jackson, has already stood down over the ban. Josh Holtham supports the police taking part in the parade, and he signed a petition with more than 500 signatures looking to overturn the ban.
We don't need to turn them away. Our community is about inclusion and acceptance. There's LGBTIQ members within ranks of police and straight friends and family who support us and the New Zealand Police.
He understands there are sections of the community who continue to feel marginalised by the police, but he says closing them out isn't the answer.
It's not about diminishing the reality of what happened literally only a couple of decades ago, but the police are working with us today, as I said, actively side by side in the community, make it safer for us all.
In a statement, the Auckland Pride Board Chair Sissy Rock says it's working with the police to find a solution. Police Inspector Tracy Phillips, the Senior District Liaison Officer for Diversity, says calls for the boycott are humbling, and the police are in talks with the Pride Board about what steps to take next. The Auckland Pride Festival is set to take place in February 2019. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko John Boynton aho.
Pilots want the laws around drone use beefed up to force users to register their aircrafts. They say compulsory registration would make flying safer as the number of near-miss incidents between airplanes and drones increases. Ben Strang reports.
Air traffic through Wellington Airport ground to a halt on Sunday evening as a drone hovered in the path of incoming aircraft. The drone was inside a restricted airspace because it was within 4 kilometres of an airport and it was in an air traffic control zone. Incidents like these are on the rise. Tim Robinson of the Airline Pilots Association says pilots fear what would be a life-threatening event if a plane and drone collide.
The major issue is the chance of collision. If there was a collision with especially one of the bigger sized drones with a small to medium sized aircraft, it could be catastrophic. It could bring those aircraft down. But the other big thing, of course, is the distraction. As you well know, close to airports, pilots are concentrating on the takeoff and landing phase of flight, and even a drone operating close by to the aircraft is a significant distraction when they should be concentrating on other things at a critical stage of flight.
Tim Robinson says airline pilots have been pushing for compulsory registration of drones in New Zealand. They believe forcing owners to register their drones would lead to safer flying and could mean people are held accountable for any dodgy practices. In the longer term, Mr Robinson says technology loaded onto drones may mean they're automatically grounded if people try to use them in restricted airspace.
That technology is coming. It's just a matter really of the rules and the regulations in relation to that technology going hand in hand to ensure that it works in a manner that's going to be enforceable. We certainly support the technology, we support its development. It's just got to be safely integrated into our airspace so that we're not going to have incidents such as we had yesterday at Wellington.
Drone sellers are also worried about how they're being used. Adam Kerr of drone seller Ferntech says they hand out information from the Civil Aviation Authority with each drone sold. But he says that doesn't account for common sense.
We do advise customers. It is a lot of common sense. And from my experience in piloting, drones and model aircraft and all sorts of things, if it seems dodgy, it probably is. Flying down on the bay next to Wellington Airport, you can imagine you're going to see big jetliners coming in and out all day, every day. Surely that must click to someone that it's not safe to fly here.
Evidently, it doesn't. Adam Kerr says the drones he sells, DJI drones, do have GPS information loaded, and the company have their own maps on their drones highlighting restricted airspace. But DJI's restricted zone ends at the end of the runway in Wellington, when it should continue for a further 4 kilometres. While DJI's software isn't perfect, some drone providers don't have any restrictions loaded onto their aircraft. The police were alerted to Sunday's drone incident, but were unable to locate the owner. A Wellington Airport spokesperson says flights were only delayed by about 10 minutes as a result of the incident. For Checkpoint, Corbin Strangtene.
French President Emmanuel Macron has urged world leaders marking the centenary of the World War I armistice to reject the demons of nationalism. Addressing world leaders in Paris, including Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, he described it as a betrayal of patriotism. Mr Macron and dignitaries walked to the tomb of the unknown soldier, a memorial to France's fallen under the Arc de Triomphe in the rain under black umbrellas and as church bells tolled through the city, 100 years after the guns fell silent on the Western Front. The BBC's Europe editor, Katja Adler, reports.
Grief flows unchecked across borders. Regret knows no frontiers. Presidents and heads of government of most of the 80 countries involved in the First World War came here to Paris today to remember the slaughtered millions of the first truly global conflict. President Macron's message, above all others at this commemoration: we're in this together, in our past, our present and our future.
Testimony of a British soldier.
Je me rends compte que je me faisais des illusions.
No opportunity was wasted for the French president to drive his internationalist message home. He urged action at a time when he said old demons were resurfacing in Europe and beyond.
Le patriotisme est l'exact contraire du nationalisme.
Patriotism is the exact opposite of nationalism. Nationalism is a betrayal of patriotism. By saying our interests first, who cares about the others? We erase what a nation holds dearest, what gives it life, what makes it great, and, what is most important of all, its moral values.
But not everyone here is on the same page as Emmanuel Macron. United in their pledge of never again today, the world leaders gathered here have starkly competing visions when it comes to how to avoid future conflict. Let's stick together and work together, insists Emmanuel Macron, and Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump applauded him politely today. But for them, the strong and sovereign nation state certainly comes first. Winston Churchill once said, those who do not learn from history are condemned to repeat it. In an attempt to boost international cooperation, President Macron today launched an annual peace forum, mirroring the Paris Peace Conference that followed the First World War.
I think it is important that we all remember that we can never take peace for granted, and that we have to learn lessons from the past. Some of those institutions we built after the First and the Second World War, the UN, the European Union, NATO, some of those institutions are under pressure.
The sounds, symbols and searing memories of the Great War echoed across Europe today. Ypres in Belgium, site of some of the most blood-soaked battlefields. Then this evening, just as dusk was falling, British and Commonwealth veterans, survivors of more recent conflicts, gathered together in the Paris Cathedral of Notre Dame. Remembering a world war with sadness, praying for world peace in hope.
Katia Adler in Paris there. Tributes and flowers are piling up outside Pellegrini's Espresso Bar on Burke Street in Melbourne 3 days after the terror attack that claimed the life of one of the cafe's co-owners. As locals come to terms with the loss of the man who started a Melbourne institution, Sisto Malaspina's family has just accepted an offer of a state funeral by Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews. The popular restaurateur is credited for bringing real Italian coffee culture and food to Melbourne in the 1970s. He was one of 3 people attacked by 30-year-old Hassan Khalif Shire Ali, who was shot dead by police. The ABC's James Hancock reports.
This is always a popular place to stop on a Monday morning, but today for the worst of reasons. Passers-by have been paying their respects to a life well lived by Sisto Malaspina, the co-owner of Pellegrini's Espresso Bar here in Burke Street. Flowers have been left by passers-by from all walks of life, office workers, police officers and even a politician, adding to the growing collection of floral tributes. Heartfelt messages, including one, "You were the essence of everything that was good about Melbourne." Another, "You will forever be on my mind with every coffee I have from now on." A packet of pasta has also been left for a man credited with promoting Italian culture in Melbourne.
Today I felt like I want to come and say, you know, hello, still, and bye to such a wonderful man.
Well, you knew my standard order, spaghetti carbonara, no roll. He could find a place in the restaurant with chockers, and it's just part of Melbourne. So I want to say farewell and sorry. It's a sad day, but a good day for Melbourne.
He was always a friendly face for many of us members of Parliament. We've been just a block away from Pellegrini's, and we would come down for a coffee, for a meal, and Sisto was always a friendly face. So I do want to express my condolences to his colleagues, to his family. All of Melbourne is grieving at the loss of a truly great man.
The 74-year-old was stabbed by Hassan Khalif Shire Ali while he was out on his regular afternoon walk, not far from here, a little further down Burke Street. That man was known by authorities to hold radical views, but was not considered to pose a threat and was not being actively monitored. The attack, authorities believe, was inspired by the Islamic State group. Sisto Malaspina's family has been offered a state funeral. They're considering the idea. Pellegrini's Espresso Bar will remain closed for today. It's due to reopen tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock.
A court has been told that a $10 million loan that failed construction firm Manziel gave to associated companies generated hundreds of millions in wealth for them. But Manziel never ever recouped the initial amount and instead fell heavily into debt, with building projects that ran over budget and the leaky building crisis contributing to its demise. Matthew Turnison reports from the High Court in Auckland.
By the time it went into liquidation in 2013, Manziel had made loans to related companies totalling some $61 million. Today, the lawyer for the liquidators, Mark O'Brien, told the court that a $10.3 million loan from Manziel was used to help parent company Regina with highly lucrative acquisitions in Shanghai. Even by conservative estimates, he said those purchases generated $250 million in wealth. Yet Manziel didn't get anything from the transaction.
The evidence is quite clear that money has been used in an investment which, again, through good fortune, has generated enormous wealth.
Mr O'Brien has been critical of Manziel's directors, who include former Prime Minister Dame Jenny Shipley, for not being aggressive enough in trying to recoup the loans they'd made. He argued today that they should have threatened to resign in order to prompt the parent company to make good on what was owed.
Had they, at the end of 2010, done what we say they should have done and pushed and prodded to get actual support in the door, and if necessary, threatened gently perhaps, or less gently if necessary, to resign or to cease trading, then it is quite possible something would have come in.
The directors are accused of reckless trading and trading while insolvent, and it's claimed they should have brought in the liquidators long before Manziel ultimately went under. The directors have denied this, saying they were diligent and careful and continued trading in a bid to reposition the company. But Mr O'Brien said the directors had been lulled into a false sense of security, thinking Regina's boss, Richard Yan, would bail Manziel out if need be.
It was as plain as day. I'd go so far as to say blind Freddie could have seen it. They just weren't looking because they trusted Richard to fulfil his promises, but they didn't, to use the Ronald Reagan expression, it was trust without verification.
He said Manziel had been dangling by a thread in the years leading up to the collapse, but the directors continued to trade, putting creditors' money at serious risk.
This was an unorthodox and illegitimate conduct of a major trading company arising from an ongoing decision to trade in a risky industry with no capital and in reliance on support that was never secured and always uncertain.
When Manziel went into liquidation in 2013, it owed creditors about $117 million. The hearing, which is now into its 9th week, is expected to conclude tomorrow. In Auckland for Checkpoint, call Matthew Tunis and Tēnei.
A protected weevil sent to Mana Island to help it survive is thriving, but at the peril of other rare native species. The native flax weevil, once found throughout New Zealand, now only live on rodent-free islands. 150 of the insects were introduced to Mana Island off the coast north of Wellington between 2004 and 2006, and now they're there in their thousands. Science reporter Charlie Drever hitched a ride with the Department of Conservation to the island to see what the weevils have been up to since settling in.
Following a safety briefing and a bag check for pest stowaways, Skipper Dave and I took the 30-minute boat ride to Mana Island. There we're greeted by Dock Ranger Nick Vizentsidis and his family, who are the only human inhabitants on the island. With an all-terrain vehicle, we head uphill before walking to where the weevils were first set free.
So on a really clear day over at the north point of Mana, you can see Kapiti, Taranaki, Ruapehu, Marlborough Sounds and the Seaward Kaikoura Range all from the same spot, so it's pretty stunning on a clear day.
It's not long until we see flax that has fallen prey to the weevil. With larvae feeding off the roots and adults eating the leaves, the flax is left brown and lifeless. It's not just weevils that need the flax to survive, but the rare gold-striped lizard and other native fauna.
Gold stripes basically feed and live in the flax community, and it's a really important makeup of the island's habitat, especially here and also down by the wetland as well. Yeah, when this stuff's flowering in the summer, then there's oodles of tui and bellbird feeding on them, so it's super important for the wider habitat of the island to work out how to slow the onslaught, basically.
But work is underway to restore balance to Mana Island. I visited Te Papa curator Colin Miskelly, who showed me around some of the entomology collection and an example of a weevil to see what was doing so much damage to the flax on the island.
So this is a giant weevil. It's a couple of centimetres long. One of the characters of a weevil as a group is that they have a long snout, and at the end of that are the antennae, which have a right angle bend in them. So they're quite a distinctive group of insects, which is partly why I describe them as being charismatic. They sort of have quite an odd-shaped head.
Colin Miskelly has been monitoring the situation on Mana and has helped whittle down why the insects are doing so well.
We've got a few hunches about what it is that's wrong and what's missing in the life cycle, and that's what we're hoping to trial next year. So it's almost a watch this space as we move on to, we've created a problem, now we're trying to solve it and come up with a management method that we could use to protect the remaining flax habitat on the island.
He expects projects to get underway from early next year, so the weevils might not be living in their own utopia for much longer. For Checkpoint, Charlie Drever.
And time now for some of your feedback, returning to our story about the inquiry into abuse in state care and religious institutions. This from Hera, who says, why should those older people who were in care before 1950 not be heard? Referring there to the fact that the inquiry will look at the years between 1950 and 1999, although will have some discretion to look further afield. The terms of reference we're still waiting on. They're supposed to be released sometime later today. And this regarding the teachers, Simon says teachers themselves created this recruitment crisis by demanding teacher registration. This tale wagged the dog, he says. And also on teachers is a challenging career, this person says. There are issues to address, but can we also acknowledge that schools are closed for 3 months of the year, says Kim, and they get an amazing amount of paid leave.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, I'm Paul Brennan. The head of the inquiry into abuse in religious and state institutions says it will be the largest royal commission ever undertaken in New Zealand. Sir Anand Satyanarayana will lead the 5-strong inquiry panel, which is due to begin hearing evidence in January next year. The government today announced the inquiry will be expanded to include faith-based institutions. Sir Anand says a lot of work has been done in the lead-up to that announcement, so the commission is ready to go.
And right from here, from day one, we are projecting ourselves towards the end result and providing for New Zealanders a process of healing for which the Royal Commission will be responsible.
Sir Anand Satyanarayana says the $79 million budget is prudent because counselling needs to be factored in. The Police Commissioner is welcoming a report that says the appointment process for the Deputy Commissioner Wally Haumaha was sound. The inquiry was carried out by Mary Sholton's QC. It was ordered after it emerged Mr Haumaha made comments in 2004 defending police officers accused over the rape of a woman, Louise Nicholas. The Commissioner, Mike Bush, says he has confidence in Wally Haumaha, but there is still a report into allegations of bullying to come.
I've spoken with him this afternoon. Of course, there is an IPCA inquiry underway, so we're going to wait until we see what that has to say. But of course, Wally still remains working with the New Zealand Police, working remotely, so that will continue.
Mike Bush says public trust and confidence are extremely important. Mr Haumaha says he's pleased with the outcome of the inquiry. A court has been told that a $10 million loan to the failed construction firm Manziel that the company gave to associated companies generated hundreds of millions in wealth. Manziel's directors are being sued in the High Court at Auckland for alleged reckless trading and trading while insolvent. Today, the lawyer for the liquidators, Mark O'Brien, said that the $10.3 million loan from Manziel to help associated companies with acquisitions generated at least $250 million in wealth. However, Manziel didn't benefit at all from the transaction, and he said the directors didn't try hard enough to recoup the loan.
The evidence is quite clear that money has been used in an investment which, again, through good fortune, has generated enormous wealth.
Mark O'Brien, a lawyer for the liquidators of Manziel. The Horowhenua District Council has been censured for blacklisting some people and organisations and blocking their emails. The Ombudsman has found the actions were flawed and wrong. According to an audit report leaked to media last year, between 2011 and 2017, the Council arranged for the IT team to forward the blocked emails to the Chief Executive, who then decided whether to send them on. The Ombudsman, Peter Boscher, investigated after 5 people on the blacklist complained. He says the practice was contrary to transparency, accountability and fairness.
It's just wrong that
emails sent by one person to another are intercepted without the sender or the receiver knowing. I just find that a very capricious and wrong process.
The Ombudsman, Peter Boscher. An appeal involving the Fiji politician Sitiveni Rabuka has been dismissed by the High Court at Suva. Mr Rabuka was earlier found not guilty of providing a false declaration of assets under electoral rules. The Fiji Independent Commission Against Corruption appealed, but Chief Justice Anthony Gates this afternoon dismissed the appeal. Fiji's election takes place on Wednesday. Palestinian officials in the Gaza Strip say at least 6 Palestinians have been killed and 6 others wounded by Israeli forces who carried out a raid which killed a senior Hamas leader. Hamas says an Israeli Special Forces team infiltrated an area near the southern city of Khan Yunis in a civilian car. The BBC's Tom Bateman reports.
Hamas's military wing said Israeli special forces fired from a car which was around 3 kilometres inside the Gaza Strip. An exchange of fire then broke out, with witnesses reporting tank shelling and explosions from Israeli airstrikes in the area. Sirens warning of rocket fire from Gaza have been sounding in nearby Israeli towns, with several rockets shot down by anti-missile batteries. The exposure of such a reported operation by Israeli forces inside Gaza would be extremely rare.
Tom Bateman in Jerusalem there. People Against Prisons Aotearoa believes the police have a long way to go before they should be part of the Auckland Pride parade. There are calls to boycott next year's parade after the Auckland Pride Board imposed a ban on police wearing their uniforms while taking part. However, Emily Raketi from People Against Prisons Aotearoa says she supports the ban.
It's a really positive step that the Pride Parade has acknowledged that New Zealand's police force has a lot of work to do before they should be celebrated in a parade of this kind.
Members of the police are being invited to march in plain or fancy clothes instead. It's 5 minutes past 6. On to sport now. The New Zealand golfer Danny Lee is $1 million richer after finishing second in the latest PGA tournament in Mexico. Lee fired a final round 6 under par 65 to close to within 1 of American Matt Kuchar at the Mayakoba Classic. The 28-year-old says he didn't approach the final round any differently.
I've been hitting it good all week, and I know if I just putt half decent, I'm going to have a chance or get very close. It was kind of a little bit windier than last 3 rounds we had, but you just keep hitting it straight off the tee here. You get a lot of birdie chances out there.
Danny Lee. Canberra aren't chasing Sean Johnson, but management for the highly paid Warriors National Rugby League halfback have sought out the Raiders' interest. Johnson is off contract at the end of next season, and the Warriors have told him he is free to explore offers from other clubs. News Corp Australia has reported that the Raiders have been making discreet moves to bring Johnson to Canberra for next season, but club chief executive Don Furner says the club hasn't made any approach. However, Furner says Johnson's manager did call him and they did have some preliminary discussions. And Roger Federer's hopes of winning a record-extending 7th ATP Finals title have suffered a blow as Japan's Kei Nishikori stunned the Swiss great in straight sets in their round-robin opener in London. That's the news.
Teachers hit the streets for a better deal.
Undervalued, underpaid and overworked. This offer is not going to change that tide.
A Hawke's Bay rocket heads into space.
Nothing magic in the water of Silicon Valley, and New Zealand entrepreneurs are some of the best in the world.
And locals fight a landfill plan.
Dome Valley, it's not going to be a Dome Valley, it's going to be Dump Valley. They're going to fill the Dome Valley with rubbish.
Filling you in on the important news. Morning Report with Guy Espiner and Susie Ferguson, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, the Syrian crisis through a child's eyes. Australian artist Ben Quilty discusses Home, a collection of drawings by refugee children. And after 10, former Parisian model and beachwear designer Jill Dodd, also pleasure wife to one of the world's richest men in the 80s. Join Lynn Freeman on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now we have the short forecast from Met Service taking us through to midnight tomorrow for all of the country. Northland and Auckland, fine and cloudy periods. For Waikato to Whanganui, including Coromandel Bay of plenty, the Central High Country, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, a few showers, especially about the ranges, some heavy with isolated thunderstorms and hail during the afternoons and evenings. Manawatu to Wellington, also Wairarapa and Nelson and Buller, mainly fine but isolated afternoon and evening showers about the ranges. Westland and Fiordland, showers in Fiordland, easing and spreading north this afternoon, becoming mostly fine tomorrow. Marlborough and Canterbury, mainly fine but scattered afternoon and evening showers inland today, some heavy with possible thunderstorms and hail near the ranges. Coastal low cloud tomorrow. Otago and Southland, scattered showers for the rest of today, some heavy with isolated thunderstorms and hail in the east, mainly fine tomorrow, and mainly fine at the Chatham Islands. It's just after 5:08.
Thanks, Paul. The head of the inquiry into abuse in religious and state institutions says it will be the largest royal commission ever undertaken in New Zealand. Former Governor-General Sir Anand Satanand will lead the 5-strong inquiry panel, which is due to begin hearing evidence in January next year. It has a budget of almost $79 million over 4 years, which includes more than $15 million to help participants by providing counselling and related support. Sir Anand says a lot of work has been done in the lead up to today's announcement, so the commission is ready to go.
Having had this long to prepare, we are really well geared up, in my estimation, to undertake this job efficiently and well. We have a budget which sounds very large when you say the numbers, Prime Minister, but the planning reveals that that is a prudent amount to seek, because there are such things as counselling that need to be budgeted for and dealt with. And right from here, from day one, we are projecting ourselves towards the end result and providing for New Zealanders a process of healing for which the Royal Commission will be responsible.
And of course, the government today announced the inquiry will be expanded to include faith-based institutions. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says her preference was to keep it focused on abuse in state care because the original request to hold an inquiry came from the survivors of abuse in state care.
So there was a real rationale there for why we should look at ourselves. And so that was the origin of the request. And there are those who still would like it to just be for state care. But it was very hard to ignore the strength of feeling that came through during the consultation process. I myself was a very strong advocate for it remaining narrow around state care because of that duty of care, that responsibility that we have. But, you know, we had to listen, and we have listened.
An interim report will be focused on state care and will be reported back by the end of 2020. The final report, containing the Royal Commission's findings and recommendations, will be submitted to the Governor-General in January 2023. Primary teachers and principals ditched their classrooms and hit the streets in Auckland today, kicking off a week of rolling strike action. More than 300 schools in the region closed and 100,000 students were at home for the day. The strikes come despite an improved offer from the Education Ministry and strong criticism from the Employment Relations Authority. Katie Scotcher reports.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We just want to educate.
About 50 Auckland teachers, support staff and parents, banners in hand, lined the busy intersection of Great North Road and Ponsonby Road this morning. Members of the public high-fived ralliers and those driving past, including bus drivers, tooted their horns in support. The rally was one of 18 held across the Auckland region today. Last month, teachers voted overwhelmingly in favour of rolling strike action in an effort to get smaller class sizes, more resources and significant pay rises. This Newton Central primary teacher, who doesn't want to be named, says at the moment his workload is overwhelming.
Every day I get in at 7, there's piles of work to do. I mean, there aren't enough hours in the day to get out what is expected of us. The workload keeps increasing and there's no way of mitigating it.
Karen Craig, whose son goes to Newton Central Primary, took the morning off work to stand with the teachers. She says it's the least she could do.
Teaching is one of the most important jobs in the world and it means a lot to our children, so I think that if they've decided that it's not enough for them, but as I say, the teachers at Newton were very open with us to say it's not just about the amount of the actual pay increase, it's about the actual resources and for helping in the classrooms.
In August, almost 3/4 of primary teachers and principals walked off the job in a national strike. Trish Hadfield, who's a resource teacher, says she's disappointed they have to strike again.
it's really important that our message is heard, and the negotiations with what the government's come back with is just not going to fix the problem.
The Ministry of Education put forward an offer last Thursday after a week of bargaining facilitated by the Employment Relations Authority. The ministry increased its offer for teachers at the top of the pay scale and opened the way for teachers with diplomas to get the same pay as those with degrees. Union members will discuss the latest offer while they're on strike and will vote on it in a couple of weeks. But Newton Central Primary Principal Ricky Tatena says it ignores teachers' main concerns.
Look, I've been involved in international education, and there are thousands of New Zealand teachers who are overseas, and that's because here they felt undervalued, underpaid and overworked. This offer is not going to change that tide.
Teacher Lisa Sundgren is also unhappy with the offer.
We need time to teach. We need schools need more teachers. No one's going into the profession. It's just too little money and huge workload.
Kim Hankins, also from Newton Central Primary, says it's too little, too late.
It sounds great, 700 million. They're talking about 600 special needs coordinators. Where are they going to get them from? There aren't enough people out there wanting to be teachers. We need people wanting to come into the profession, and that's not happening at the moment.
The Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, says no more money will be put on the table for teachers. He says the union hadn't been willing to compromise during mediation talks, and he's disappointed the strikes are going ahead. Justin Barlow, who teaches Year 6 children, says the rolling strike action is justified.
The last big strike we had addressing these types of things was 24 years ago. It's not like we're asking every year or every second year. It's just come to a big head.
The Employment Relations Authority has come down hard on the teachers' union and says its claim is completely unrealistic. It's urging the union to take the offer, but this Newton Central Primary teacher insists their claims are realistic.
We're not asking for more money, which is what seems to be trying to get thrown at us. We're asking for things that are going to affect the children's learning. That's all we want.
The strike action will continue tomorrow, with teachers everywhere else in the North Island, except Wellington, walking off the job. I Tamaki Makoto mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Katie Scott Churaho.
And some feedback on the teachers' strike. This from an anonymous listener who says they are not a teacher. Again, someone points out that teachers have long paid holidays in the summer. Few teachers work less than 8 to 10 hours a day, with demands of preparation and paperwork. Most work part of Saturday, this person says. During the summer holidays, they also prepare. In addition, they're in frequent contact with their students and parents after hours. I challenge any other worker on the salary of a teacher to withstand that pressure, she says. This one from Rob. Teachers do have wonderful paid leave for holidays, but that doesn't explain why fewer and fewer people want to do the job. And finally, teachers are always telling us they work whilst the kids are on holiday. So why not strike then, that listener says. To California now, gusty winds are continuing to hamper thousands of firefighters battling major fires across California. The Woolsey fire in Southern California has led to mandatory evacuation orders for more than 200,000 people in Los Angeles and Ventura counties, including many in the exclusive suburb of Malibu. The blaze alone has destroyed at least 177 homes and other buildings. In Northern California, the Camp Fire, which has destroyed the town of Paradise and killed at least 29 people, is still burning. Firefighters have made some progress, but the fire is only partially contained. 100 people remain missing. In Paradise today, locals are returning to what's left of their lives and livelihoods. CNN's Nick Valencia reports.
Is that the Welcome to Paradise sign? It is! That's our Paradise sign. Oh.
By the time most people in Paradise realized how quickly the fire was spreading, they were already in trouble. This man couldn't believe his eyes.
Town is on fire.
This is nothing like what we've had before, but here you're looking at 90% of the homes are gone in every single neighborhood.
Jody Jones is the Paradise mayor. She says the speed and ferocity of the fire only gave the town 5 minutes to evacuate. The mass exodus caused gridlock on the main road out of town. There was such panic, some drivers abandoned their cars as they tried to flee on foot.
We did have an evacuation plan in place. We did implement it. It worked the way it was supposed to work, We just never anticipated having to evacuate all zones all at the same time.
An automatic emergency alert was sent out to landlines and cell phones of registered residents.
But not everyone got a notification. Cole Wyatt and his family, they live here. And Cole tells me he was asleep at the time when the fire started. Had it not been for a phone call from his brother, he says he might not have gotten out before it was too late.
He didn't even think it was bad enough to call, but something in his gut said, I need to, make sure my family knows. And thank God he did.
Cole wasn't registered to receive the alerts.
I just immediately started thinking about my daughter.
In the chaos, Cole says it took him 2 hours to find out his 8-year-old daughter had already been picked up from school by a family member. When they finally did evacuate, stuck in the gridlock, he ran out of gas. A stranger stopped and gave him enough to get out of town.
I mean, has it hit you yet?
No, I'm still in shock. I'm still waiting to wake up from this terrible dream. My daughter, she said, I know we hated our home and we wanted to move out, but it was our home, and I'm sad that it's gone.
Outside of Paradise, we meet James and Ruby Harris. Their car still covered in ash from the fire. They show us where it was damaged when an RV crashed into them during the evacuation, trying to move it out of the way. The scene they describe is absolute mayhem.
And my husband had to get our son out of the car and into the wheelchair and, buckle him in and, keep my other 2 autistic sons from taking off.
And this is while flames are surrounding you.
Exactly. And everybody's running past us.
Though they were both able to get out, both the Harrises and Wyatts have nothing left to return to.
A whole town was wiped off the face of the earth in a matter of 8 hours.
The most destructive fire in California history has changed their town forever.
Meanwhile, the Camp Fire burned down more than 6,700 homes and businesses in Paradise, more structures than any other California wildfire on record, and the death toll, which could rise, also makes it one of the deadliest. Only the Griffith Park fire in 1933 and Tunnel Fire in 1991 have claimed more lives. Earlier this afternoon, severe weather expert Jeff Berardelli told me what those in the high-risk areas can expect over the coming days.
Bad news in Southern California. The winds are strengthening, and wind gusts for the next 2 to 3 days are likely to be anywhere from 40 to as much as 70 miles an hour, which is really makes it very difficult to fight these fires, and it makes the fires spread more quickly. The rain is delayed by about a month or so. So our wet season hasn't begun, and that also means the dry season and the fire season has been extended at least about a month so far. And we're likely to see it continue for quite a while because we don't see any substantial rain in California's future, at least for the next 10 days.
So, Jeff, basically, is fire season becoming, well, almost an all-year-round thing?
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. In fact, our stats tell us that since the 1970s, fire season has increased by 3 to 4 months. So instead of it being maybe a phenomena that's maybe 5 months long, it's probably closer to 9 or 10 months long. The truth is that a lot of people are talking about it as a year-long phenomena. And not only that, but since the 1970s, not only has the fire season grown by 3 to 4 months, but we've also seen about 3 times the amount of large fires. So we've seen literally a 300% increase in large fires, especially across the western part of the United States.
Can you put this one in context? Where do these fires fit in the history of California?
Yeah, these have been some of the most destructive fires we've seen in terms of the damage that it's caused. However, they're not yet the biggest, and that's because they really just started only a few days ago. Give them time, and there's a chance they could grow much larger, especially the one in Southern California, which, they're going to be dealing with some very strong winds the next couple of days, so there could be a chance that that fire may really grow very fast and much bigger. However, the 4 of the 5 biggest fires we've seen in California history have happened in the past 6 years, and the 2 biggest fires have happened within the past 2 years. So as you can see, fires are growing bigger in California, especially over the past couple of years as climate really has changed.
So is it global warming?
Yeah, we think that's a part of it. Remember, the population of the whole world, and especially in the United States as well, is increasing. The population of California has gone from 20 million people back in the 1970s Right now, the population is about 40 million people. So with extra people living in California, they're encroaching on what are very rural areas where people didn't live or there weren't as many people. There are more people kind of brushing up against the trees in the forest, and it's easier for these fires to ignite. So that's a part of it. But a large part of it is also climate change. A lot of things are happening in the American West right now. Snow cover, snowpack we call it, is decreasing. And what that means is the snow melts earlier. And if the snow melts earlier, there's less water available during the summertime. And if there's less snow around earlier, that means the fire season is longer. Also, temperatures have been warming. We've seen about a 2-degree temperature increase in the American West, 2 degrees Fahrenheit, not Celsius. So with that increase in warmer temperatures in the West, we're seeing more evaporation. With more evaporation, everything is drying out. The brush is drying out. The ground is drying out. One more thing, precipitation, rainfall, and snowfall is less predictable. It's happening more inconsistently. So because of that, we're getting longer stretches of time where we're getting into drought conditions where it doesn't rain as much. And so therefore, for all of those reasons, especially over the past 3 to 4 decades, and mainly because of climate change, we're seeing a greater propensity for drier conditions, more drought, and thus larger fires are happening.
And back home now, the Police Commissioner says he still has confidence in Deputy Commissioner Wally Homaha, pending an IPCA report into allegations of bullying. Deputy Commissioner Homaha is in the clear for now, after an inquiry into his appointment found the process was sound. The review was sparked after it emerged that Mr Homaha made comments in 2004 defending police officers accused of raping Louise Nicholas. The report by Mary Sholtons QC says the State Services Commission carefully investigated allegations and rumours relating to Mr Homaha and his association with the accused officers, but found no substantiated concerns. The Police Commissioner, Mike Bush, told our political editor, Jane Patterson, it's good to have the Sholtons inquiry completed.
Well, we welcome the report. It's been several months, and we absolutely accept the findings.
Pleased that the appointment process has stood up to scrutiny?
Yes, we absolutely are. Mary Sholtons QC has found that the process was sound and that there was no available or relevant information omitted from the process, which we were confident of, but it's excellent to have the report.
So what now for Deputy Commissioner Homaha?
So what now for Deputy Commissioner Homaha? I've spoken with him this afternoon. Of course, there is an IPCA inquiry underway, so we're going to wait until we see what that has to say. But of course, Wally still remains working with the New Zealand Police, working remotely, so that will continue.
So what was the tenor of your conversation with him?
It was all about where to from here, next steps.
And was that really in the context of that IPCA report? I mean, how heavily is the weighting between this one and that IPCA report to come?
Well, of course, this is the government report. This is the initial report, which goes into the process and touches on other matters. It would be really inappropriate for me to talk to the IPCA report in any detail. We're yet to see where that lands, but I've got no doubt we'll know a little bit more in the coming weeks.
Do you have confidence in Wally Homaha in his current role?
Yes, I do have confidence in Wally Homaha.
So there's nothing in this report or this process that's thrown up any issues for you?
So what this report has said is that the process was sound and that nothing had been omitted. So yes, I continue to have confidence in Wally.
In terms of, police history, obviously you've been through some culture change after the Baisley report. Has this been at all damaging in terms of just more discussion about police culture and it being done in a very public way?
Yes, we're really conscious of public trust and confidence. We've undergone a massive culture change within the organisation, which is very, very positive for the communities we serve. So we take these things extremely seriously. And what I can say is we monitor levels of trust and confidence, and they've remained stable, if not increased, over the past few months.
That's Police Commissioner Mike Bush speaking to Jane Patterson. The Ombudsman has condemned the Horowhenua District Council's blocking of emails as unreasonable. Between 2011 and 2017, the council's chief executive, David Clapperton, was blocking people's emails to the council without them knowing. Emails from people or organisations on a blacklist were blocked by the council's IT team. Individual emails were sent to David Clapperton so he could decide whether they would go through to the recipient. The Chief Ombudsman, Peter Boscia, investigated after 5 people on the blocked list complained. He told Phil Pennington the practice was flawed.
There are 2 objections that I have. One is that it challenges democracy when people, constituents hoping to contact their councillor, can't make that contact because unbeknown to them, their emails aren't getting through but being diverted. The second is that it's just wrong that emails sent by one person to another are intercepted without the sender or the receiver knowing. I just find that a very capricious and wrong process.
Did you hear anything that justified it, that you could say, yep, there's a good reason why they did that?
We did not. We looked at a sample of 47 emails and none of the content that we saw justified interception of the sort that was occurring. I think the other thing I'd like to say is that if there had been evidence and if there had been abusive or wrong messages sent, there are ways to deal with that, to forewarn, to manage so that the behaviour is ameliorated. But you don't just act unilaterally.
The council, however, and David Clapperton have repeatedly and insistently said that these were abusive emails that they were protecting their staff from. Were they lying?
We did not see any evidence in the sample of 47 emails that we saw that justified interception and quarantining of the sort that occurred here. I'm sure that if there had been that evidence, that would have been shown to us.
And that is the Chief Ombudsman, Peter Boscia, talking to reporter Phil Pennington there. Just before we go, time for this last bit of feedback. I'm a trained primary teacher, out of teaching for 5 years in a non-teaching role, but still in education. The hassle to get recertified meant I never returned to the classroom, this person says. The Ministry of Education needs to cut down on pointless paperwork, says Chris. Thanks for your feedback. That's us for the evening. We'll catch you tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Strong pleas from victims and church leaders convinced the Prime Minister to expand the inquiry into abuse of children in state care to include religious institutions. Primary and secondary school teachers plan to join forces against the government next year if their pay disputes are not settled. The Prime Minister is refusing to say whether she has confidence in Wali Haumaha, while police investigations continue into allegations of bullying made against him. And the Horowhenua District Council has been reprimanded for blacklisting problematic ratepayers and blocking their emails. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
RNZ National, with a fresh take on the day's news at 10 every weeknight with Karen Hay.
I'm very disappointed Primary School Teachers Union have chosen strike action.
Including the latest national and international news from the RNZ News team.
He couldn't believe the immediate relief after one dose of the cream prescribed by Dr.